Hello, my friends, how are you? My name is Mr. Nightshade. I will tell you scary stories every day. Lonely houses, empty places, scary things. Everything is scary here. If you are interested, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are from in the comments. Let's begin. When I was younger, the house we lived in never seemed strange to anyone else. It was small, quiet, painted in the kind of pale color that made it blend into the street. Every house looked the same, with trimmed grass and small porches, where old people sat in the evenings. We had neighbors who said, "Good morning," cars that passed at the same time every day, kids who played until the streetlights came on. There was nothing about that place that felt dangerous, not the kind of house anyone would ever whisper stories about, but even as a kid I sometimes felt like it breathed, like the air inside it was heavier than anywhere else. I never told anyone, because it was hard to explain. It wasn't haunted, it wasn't even cold. It just felt aware, like the walls listened, like they remembered who walked through them. My mom worked long shifts, mostly at night. My brother was almost never home. He stayed with his friends most of the time, so it was just me in the house. We got used to each other, I thought. But some nights the quiet was too deep, like the house was waiting for something to happen. It started slow. One fork trembling slightly in a cup on the counter when the air was still, the faint sound of a door clicking shut somewhere behind me when every door was open, a drawer sliding out just an inch when I turned away. Nothing ever big enough to be certain, but enough to make me stop and look around every time. My mom laughed it off. She said houses settle and shift. Maybe that was true, maybe not, but I noticed how the air always changed after dark. It felt like standing underwater, like sound moved slower. The night that changed everything was the night I was 16. It had been raining all day. The sound of drops on the windows, constant and low. I took a shower before bed, the kind of long shower that fogs up the mirror and makes the room feel smaller, warmer, safer for a few minutes. I forgot about the noise outside. I just listened to the water. Then I noticed the curtain. It moved slightly inward at first, almost like it was breathing with me. I thought it was the air vent again, but it didn't stop. The folds kept shifting closer each time, slowly, rhythmically, like someone brushing it with their fingers. I stepped back. The steam made it hard to see, but I swear I saw a shadow on the other side. Just the faintest, darker shape moving toward me. The curtain pushed in further until it almost touched my shoulder. I slapped at it, thinking it would fall still, but my hand met something solid, soft but real. Something that pulled back as soon as I touched it. I froze, water still running. My breath caught in my throat. I waited a long time before turning off the tap when I stepped out. The tiles felt cold, and the mirror was completely fogged. I wiped it with my hand, half expecting to see someone behind me, but there was only my reflection. The towel felt heavy when I wrapped it around me. I opened the bathroom door, and the hallway light flickered once, just once, like it does when power stutters, and then steadied. I was halfway to my room when something moved in the corner of my vision. A figure, quick, thin, darting from the hallway past the kitchen and out toward the garage. The door there was open, wide, and I never left that door open, ever. I stopped right where I was, my feet glued to the floor. Every sound around me vanished, even the hum of the refrigerator. It was like the house was holding its breath with me. I couldn't move, couldn't even call out, my throat dry and locked after a minute, maybe more. I forced myself to walk to the garage door. Every step felt like walking into a darker place. I closed it, slowly turned the lock and leaned against it. My skin prickling, the air felt wrong. It was thick, like breathing through wet cloth. I went to my room, sat on the bed, and tried to think of anything normal, music, a show, homework, anything. But the more I tried to think, the more the silence grew. I told myself it was a trick of light, maybe a neighbor's car, maybe. I was tired. I kept repeating that until I almost believed it enough to lie down. The living room. Light glowed faintly from the kitchen. It was quiet, calm, almost peaceful, until I heard the sound of the garage door creaking open again. It was so slow I thought at first it was my imagination. A soft metallic groan followed by a dull thud. I stared at the dark doorway. I couldn't see anything at first. Then a pale shape slid into view, moving like a shadow. Underwater, its skin caught the dim light. It wasn't walking, it was gliding. I could see it clearly now, too tall, too thin. Its arms hung low, and its head tilted slightly as it moved from the garage across the kitchen. Its footsteps made no sound, but I could feel them, each one like a weight pressing down on the floor. It went down the hallway to the bedrooms and back again, faster every time, like it was trapped in a loop. Then it stopped right at the edge of the kitchen, turned slightly toward me, its face a blur, the mouth too wide, the eyes deep shadows. It lifted one hand and I could see its fingers, long, bony, trembling, not human, not right. It didn't look at me. It just stood there for a second, then turned back, disappearing into the dark, the garage door closing softly behind it. I stayed awake till morning, staring at the same spot, afraid to blink, afraid that if I did, it would come closer. The sunlight through the curtains finally broke the silence, and I remember feeling like I could breathe again. My mom came home later and asked why I looked so pale. I said I hadn't slept. That was true. I didn't tell her what I saw. I didn't tell anyone. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. The air heavy with something that waited. I tried to forget it, but little things came back. The curtain moved again sometimes before I turned the water on. Once I found my towel wet before I even showered. And sometimes late at night, I'd hear soft footsteps from the kitchen. Faint and steady, like someone pacing barefoot across the tile. When I locked the garage door before bed, I'd wake to find it open again, the key still in the lock. A week later, I slept in my brother's room. His bed was by the window, and the moonlight fell across the floor in a pale square. Around 3 a.m, I woke to the sound of steps moving slowly down the hallway. The kind of sound that's too careful, too steady to be a house shifting. They stopped right outside the door. The knob turned, softly once, then stopped. I lay there staring at it, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. But I could hear breathing on the other side, slow, deep, deliberate. I stayed awake till dawn. The knob never moved again, but I could still feel the air shift with each breath. In the morning, there were marks on the floor. Not footprints exactly, just faint imprints in the dust, shaped like feet, but longer, thinner. The toes stretched too far, the heel too narrow. I cleaned them up, told myself it was nothing. Told myself I was imagining it again. Months passed like that. Some nights were normal, some weren't. Sometimes I'd find chairs turned slightly, or doors open when I swore I'd closed them. Sometimes I'd catch movement in the glass of the microwave, or the reflection of the TV when it was off, like someone was walking behind me. The house was quiet, but never still. Years went by. I moved out, went to college, tried to forget that place. But when my mom asked me to visit one weekend, I agreed. She still lived there. The same small house, the same color, the same smell of coffee when I walked in. It felt smaller than I remembered, but also heavier, like the air hadn't moved in years. She smiled, said she'd missed me. She didn't look scared. She never mentioned anything strange. That night I went to the bathroom to wash my face. The mirror fogged slightly even though the water was cold, and the shower curtain moved just barely in and out, slow like breathing. I stopped. Everything went silent, and then I heard it. My name said softly from the hallway, a man's voice, calm, quiet, like someone who had been waiting there all along. I turned slowly toward the doorway and saw a shadow stretch across the wall, pale and thin and reaching toward me. When I think back to that house, it never seemed like the kind of place anyone would call haunted. It was small, old, but quiet. The kind of home that felt tired, but safe. My mom worked nights. My brother spent most of his time with friends. And I was used to being alone. It never bothered me. I thought I knew every sound, every creak, every shadow, the hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the clock. It was all part of the rhythm of the house. But sometimes late at night, that rhythm would change, like the house would hold its breath and everything inside would wait for something to move. At first, it was the smallest things. Spoons clinking softly in drawers by themselves, a door creaking open in the hallway when there was no wind, the faint sound of something dragging on the floor just out of sight. I'd tell myself it was the air or the pipes or my imagination, because those explanations were easier to live with. But as the years passed, the house began to feel different. The air heavier, the quiet too deep, like the walls were listening instead of echoing back. When I turned 16, I remember one night more clearly than any other. I was home alone again. My mom working late. My brother gone. I took a shower like always, and I remember the curtain, it began to move, not from the air vent, not from my own movement. It swayed inward slowly like something breathing just on the other side. At first I ignored it. I always ignored things until it became impossible. The folds of the curtain began to press inwards again and again like hands pushing through. I stood frozen watching until it came so close that I struck it, and when I did, I felt something solid, cold, and human. It didn't pull away immediately. It just pressed back once, more before the air went still. I stepped out, the water dripping off me, the light in the hallway flickering faintly, as if the house itself had shivered. I walked out toward my room, and that's when I saw a movement. Something pale darting from the hallway to the kitchen, then disappearing into the garage. The door was open. I never left it open. The lock was always turned. The latch always clicked. But that night it stood wide. The shadows inside looked deeper than they should have, I told myself. To close it, to just walk over and shut it. But the floor felt wrong under my feet, like the wood itself didn't want me to move. I finally reached it, slammed the door shut, turned the lock, and leaned against it, breathing hard, the air around me. Quiet, thick, waiting. Nothing happened, no sound, no movement, but somehow I knew it was still there behind the door, listening. That night I dragged my mattress into the living room. The only light left on was the one above the stove. I lay there staring at the garage door, afraid to blink, afraid it would move again. I don't know how long I stayed like that until I heard the first sound. A soft click, like metal shifting, then a slow hinge creaking. The garage door swung open by itself. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Something stepped out into the faint light. Tall, thin skin, too pale, too smooth. It moved without sound, gliding across the tiles like the air carried it. I could see the shape of its face, but not the features. It passed. The kitchen disappeared. Down the hallway, then came back again, pacing faster and faster until finally it stopped. Halfway turned slightly, its head tilting as if it could see me without eyes. Then it went back into the garage, and the door closed softly. I didn't move until morning. I sat there as the light from the window slowly filled the room, pretending the world was normal when my mom came home. I smiled. I said nothing. I never told anyone, but the house didn't forget. Weeks passed. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of someone breathing near my door or the faint whisper of fabric brushing the floor. Once I found the hallway lights all turned on at once, though I'd turned them off before bed another night. I found the shower curtain drawn closed again. After I'd left it open, I began to realize it wasn't what I saw that mattered. It was how the house reacted. It wanted me to feel it, to notice it, to think about it. One night, I dreamed of walking through the house, and every door I opened led to another hallway. The same hallway over and over, the air heavy with that same humming sound. When I woke up, the sound was still there. A faint vibration in the walls. I pressed my ear to the plaster, and I could swear I heard something beneath the surface, a pulse, a rhythm, slow, steady, alive. After that, I started noticing it more, the way the walls would groan like breathing. The way the floorboards creaked in patterns, not random, like footsteps moving in circles. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it filled the space until silence itself felt wrong. One evening I went into the kitchen and all the drawers were open. Not wide, just enough to show the silverware inside perfectly aligned. The air smelled like wet dust and metal. I closed, each one slowly, trying not to think, trying not to let it know I was afraid. But every time I pushed a drawer shut, I heard another one slide open behind me. I moved out when I turned 18. I thought distance would save me, but even then, in new places I'd wake at night to the same sounds, a door creaking softly, a whisper under the floor, the faint smell of that old house following me like a shadow. I tried to forget, but forgetting doesn't make something that lived inside you disappear. Years later, I went back to visit my mom. She still lived there. She said she liked the quiet. The moment I stepped inside, it felt the same, the air heavy but familiar, the furniture rearranged but the rhythm unchanged. I told myself it was just nostalgia, that strange weight in my chest, just memory. But when I went to the bathroom, the shower curtain was moving again, in and out slowly, like breathing. I stood there frozen, and then I heard it, My name from the hallway spoken softly, calm, certain. Like someone who'd been waiting a long time, I turned, but no one was there. The house felt alive around me, like it was aware of every breath. I took the floor under my feet, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And that's when I realized maybe it had never been haunted at all. Maybe it wasn't something inside the house. Maybe the house itself was the thing alive, watching, listening, feeding on the fear it planted. And after all those years away, it was only waiting for me to come back, because I wasn't just part of its memory, I was part of it. And as I stood there hearing my name again, closer this time, I finally understood that I had never really left that house, and that house had never stopped breathing. When I was younger, our house never felt like the kind of place that should scare anyone. It was a simple small home on a street where people walked their dogs and kids played in the afternoon. There were streetlights and neighbors and everything that made you feel safe. My mom worked nights, sometimes my brother spent time at his friends, and I was used to being alone. It never really bothered me at first because I grew up there. It was all I knew. But there were times when something about the air inside felt different, like the walls were holding their breath. It started as small things, spoons rattling slightly in the drawers. The faint sound of something dropping in another room, though nothing was out of place when I checked. Little sounds that you could almost ignore if you convinced yourself hard enough. One evening I was sitting in the living room watching TV when the sound of a door closing echoed softly down the hallway. The bedrooms were empty. My brother gone. My mother still at work. I told myself it was the air conditioning. It was always the air conditioning that was my excuse for everything. But after a while, excuses start to sound like lies, even when you tell them to yourself. One night when I was 16, I took a shower. The house quiet, except for the steady hum of the fridge. I remember the warmth of the water, the sound of it hitting the tiles, and the curtain swaying slightly from the air vent. But then, it began to move inwards slowly, like someone was standing just on the other side brushing against it. I ignored it at first, but it kept coming closer. The folds of the curtain pushing in toward me like invisible hands pressing gently against it. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the cold wall. It happened again, faster this time. Then again and again, like someone trying to reach me through the thin plastic, until finally it came so far in that I swatted at it and my hand struck something solid, cold, and heavy. Like a hand pushing from the other side, the curtain snapped back and the air went still. I stood there frozen, staring at it, half expecting someone to pull it open, but nothing happened. I turned off the water, grabbed my towel, and stepped out the floor. Cold under my feet, the hallway light flickered as I passed by. I was still wet, the towel barely clinging to me, when I saw it movement in the corner of my eye, a figure darting from the hallway to the kitchen, then out toward the garage. It was fast, but I caught enough to see pale skin, dark hair, and a shape that moved too smoothly. Too quick. The garage door was open, and I never left it open. I always kept it shut, especially when I was alone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stood in the middle of the hallway, unable to move for what felt like forever. The air felt thick, like it was pushing back against me. I wanted to call someone, my mom, my brother, anyone. But my phone was in the living room. I forced myself to walk past the kitchen. Every shadow felt alive, the hum of the refrigerator louder than it should be. I reached the door and shut the garage, locking it tight, then leaned against it, breathing hard, listening. There was nothing. No sound. No movement. But that didn't help. Somehow the silence was worse. I went back to my room, sat on the bed for a long time, trying to convince myself that I imagined it. Maybe I'd seen my reflection. Maybe the light had played tricks on me. Maybe anything but the truth. I stayed there, until my heart slowed down, until I could almost believe it was over. Then I turned off the lights except for the small one in the kitchen and lay down on my mattress in the living room, facing the garage door. The quiet was almost soothing. For a few minutes I thought I'd be able to sleep. But then I heard it, a slow metallic creak followed by a soft thud. I stared at the garage door, afraid to blink. It swung open just a few inches at first, then wider, the darkness behind it deep and still. Something moved, pale against the dark. A shape stepping out slowly. Not walking, not running, just gliding. It passed across the kitchen. The faintest sound of feet dragging across tile. Then it was gone down the hallway toward the bedrooms, then back. Again it moved the same path over and over, the air turning colder each time, like it carried the chill of somewhere else with it. I couldn't move. My body refused to obey my breathing. Shallow and fast. It never looked at me. It just kept pacing faster and faster until finally it stopped. Halfway turned slightly, as if it could sense me watching its outline sharp against the dim light of the kitchen. It raised its arm just a little, and I could see that it was thin, almost skeletal, the skin too, pale too smooth, the fingers long and trembling. And then it turned back, gliding toward the garage, disappearing behind the door, which closed softly, like someone had pulled it shut from the inside. I stayed awake until sunrise. I didn't dare close my eyes. I waited for the sound to return, but it didn't. When my mom came home that morning, I didn't tell her anything. I thought maybe if I ignored it, the memory would fade. But it didn't. The next night, when I went to shower again, the curtain was already swaying before I turned on the water. When I walked into the hallway afterward, I could hear soft steps from the kitchen. Even though I was alone, I locked the garage door again and again every night. But sometimes I'd wake up and find it open. A week later, I decided to sleep in my brother's room instead. It felt safer until around 3 in the morning. I heard someone walking slowly through the hallway. The sound was faint but close. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. There was a long pause, then the doorknob turned once softly and stopped. After that, I didn't hear anything. I stayed there for hours, staring at the doorknob, waiting for it to move again. The next morning, I checked the floor. The dust near the door was disturbed. Faint marks like bare feet pressed into it, not large, not small, just wrong. Somehow the toes too long, the heel too narrow. I cleaned them up, pretending they weren't there, pretending everything was fine, but from then on I could never shake the feeling that the house wasn't empty. When I was alone, months passed. The sounds came and went. Sometimes I'd hear the faintest whisper from the garage, or see a light flicker for no reason. Once I woke to find the kitchen chair turned toward the hallway, like someone had been sitting there watching the doorway. I stopped using that chair years later. After I'd moved out for college, I went back one weekend to visit my mom. She still lived there, the same house, the same smell of coffee and old wood. It looked smaller somehow, but cleaner. She seemed fine, though tired. She never mentioned anything strange, and I didn't ask that night. As I was heading to the bathroom, I noticed the shower curtain moving slightly, in and out, just like before. I froze for a moment, staring at it. Then I heard a voice, faint but clear, from the hallway. A man's voice saying my name. Not whispering, not shouting. Just calm, like he'd been waiting all these years and finally knew I had come back. I grew up in a house far away from any neighbors, down a long dirt road surrounded by fields and trees. The only light visible at night was from my grandparents' porch. Half a mile away, no cars ever passed by after dark. The silence was thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like the house itself was breathing. Sometimes it felt peaceful, but that night it didn't. Something about it felt wrong from the very moment the sun disappeared behind the hills. I was in my room talking to my friend on the phone. The evening was quiet. Just the faint hum of the house and the sound of my voice echoing softly against the walls. Everything seemed normal, until I heard a loud crash coming from the living room downstairs. It was sharp, sudden, and violent, like the front door had been slammed open. My heart started pounding. I froze in place for a long moment before I moved quietly to my door and locked it. I remember my hands shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. The silence that followed was so complete that it made the sound of my own breathing unbearable. I didn't want to believe someone had come in, but the thought kept running through my mind over and over again. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps moving up the stairs one by one. The sound echoed through the hallway. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. They reached the top landing, paused for a moment, and then walked right past my door. My breath caught in my throat. I could hear them stop at my sister's room. The handle turned, the door creaked open, and then a dull thump followed by silence, and then the sound of her phone being knocked off the hook. That was the moment I knew something was really wrong. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I just sat on the floor by my bed, clutching the phone to my ear, whispering to my friend, trying to keep my voice from trembling. She was asking me what was happening, but I couldn't answer. I just listened, terrified, waiting to hear something else, another step, another crash, anything. The minutes dragged by like hours. I remember watching the shadows on the floor shift as my lamp flickered slightly, like the house itself was breathing. Too fast, finally. After what must have been half an hour, I saw headlights flash across the window. My sister and her boyfriend were home. I ran downstairs, almost tripping over myself. And when I got to the living room, everything looked perfectly normal. The front door was closed and locked. Nothing was broken. Nothing was out of place. Her boyfriend searched the house room by room, every door, every window, every corner. He found nothing. No sign that anyone had ever been there. Then, my sister went into her room and she stopped cold. Her cordless phone was lying under her bed, the line still off the hook. We all stared at it for a long time, not knowing what to say. It didn't make sense. There was no way anyone could have gotten in or out without us hearing them or seeing them. But something had been there. I could feel it deep in my chest, like a weight pressing down from that night on. I never felt safe in that house again. Every time I was alone, I would sit in the living room, with a light on, holding something heavy just in case. Every creak, every sound made me flinch, even when nothing happened. The silence was worse, because it felt like the house was waiting, watching. And sometimes when I lay in bed at night, I swore I could still hear those footsteps on the stairs, slow, careful, deliberate, moving past my room, again and again, as if whatever it was had never really left. After that night, I started noticing small things that didn't make sense at first, things that seemed too small to matter, but slowly built up into something I couldn't ignore. Objects would move slightly from where I left them. My door would be cracked open in the morning, even though I was sure I had locked it before sleeping, and sometimes I'd wake up to the faint sound of whispering from downstairs, soft and slow, like someone talking just under their breath. The first few times I told myself it was the wind or the pipes, or maybe I was dreaming. But one night I realized I was wide awake when I heard it. I could hear every word, or at least I thought I could. It wasn't English, it was something else. A low murmuring that made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself it was coming from outside. Maybe the television, from my grandparents' house, but they lived too far away for sound to travel through the fields. Like that, the next day I told my sister. She just laughed and said I was letting that first scare get to my head. But a week later, she came into my room at 2 a.m, her face pale and her hands shaking. She asked if I had been walking around the house earlier. I told her no. I had been in bed. She said she woke up to the sound of someone pacing back and forth in the hallway outside. Her door, when she opened it, the footsteps stopped, but the floorboards were still creaking, like someone was standing right in front of her. Invisible. She didn't say anything else. She just went back to bed and locked her door. After that, we both started hearing things, sometimes knocks on the walls, sometimes the sound of something moving in the attic. One night, I heard a dragging noise above my ceiling. It went on for minutes, slow, steady, dragging like someone pulling something heavy across the floor. I didn't dare go up there. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. And then came the smell, a faint scent of damp earth, like wet soil. It filled the hallway near my sister's room, and it got stronger every night. We checked for leaks or mold, nothing. We even called our uncle to take a look. He said everything looked fine, but he couldn't explain the smell he left that evening and said maybe an animal got in through the crawl space. But that night, the smell was worse than ever. And something new happened around midnight. I heard tapping from inside my closet. Not from the door, from inside the wall behind it. Rhythmic, soft tapping, like someone drumming their fingers. Slowly, I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I just lay there staring at the door until morning, when I finally opened it. Everything looked normal, but I noticed something that made my stomach twist, a small patch of dirt on the floor near the back corner. Fresh, loose soil, as if someone had dug it up from outside. My sister refused to talk about it, but I could tell she was scared too. She started spending most nights at her boyfriend's place, leaving me alone, and I hated it. The silence in that house wasn't just silence anymore. It was breathing. It was aware. Some nights I could swear I saw shadows moving under the door. Faint shapes like feet standing just outside my room waiting. I stopped sleeping in the dark. After that, I kept the lights on until dawn, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the stairs. Something that didn't belong there but knew every inch of the house, every door, every room, every sound. I kept thinking back to that first night, to the crash, to the footsteps, to the phone off the hook, and I realized something. The sound I heard that night wasn't the door being broken into. It was the door being closed from the inside. After realizing that sound was the door closing from the inside, something inside me changed. The fear I felt before became something heavier. It wasn't just terror anymore. It was the knowledge that whatever had entered the house that night had never left. I started keeping track of everything, every sound, every shadow. Every time something moved, I marked the time, the room, and what I felt. Sometimes my notes didn't make sense. Sometimes I'd wake up to find the notebook lying open on a different page than where I left it one morning. I found my handwriting trembling and uneven with a sentence I didn't remember writing it. "Knows your name," I told myself. I must have written it half asleep, but the letters looked wrong. Too rushed, too desperate, as if someone else had used my hand to write it. The nights became worse. The air in the house felt thick like humidity, but colder, like the temperature dropped whenever I was alone. I could hear faint breathing when I stood near the stairs, shallow, raspy breathing coming from below. One night I decided to face it. I turned off every light and stood in the hallway. The house was completely dark. Only the faint moonlight through the window. I waited for the sound. Nothing happened. For several minutes, then a floorboard creaked behind me. I turned, but there was nothing, only the faint outline of the living room. Then came the sound again from the other side. This time closer. I stepped backward toward my room, trying not to make a sound. The darkness around me felt alive, like it was moving slowly, circling. I could hear a faint scraping sound against the wall, a slow dragging noise that followed me as I backed up. I reached for my doorknob and closed the door fast. I leaned against it, heart pounding, trying to listen through the silence. A few seconds later, something tapped on the other side of the door. 3 slow knocks, each one heavier than the last. I whispered, asking who was there. Even though I didn't want an answer, there was no reply, but the air felt wrong, too cold, too still. I could hear a faint whisper. Not words, just breath, like something exhaling right next to the door. The smell of damp earth returned stronger than ever. I stayed up until sunrise, clutching the flashlight and a kitchen knife. The next morning I saw small marks on the door like fingerprints, but not quite human. They were longer, almost claw-like. My sister came home later that day and told me she dreamed someone was standing by her bed, whispering to her over and over the same phrase. You shouldn't have heard it close. She was shaking when she told me that. I didn't know what to say. We decided to spend that night together in the living room, thinking maybe it would help to not be alone. We left all the lights on, but around 2 a.m. the power went out instantly. No flicker, no warning, just complete blackness. The silence that followed felt alive. We both heard it. The faint sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. Slow, careful dragging, something heavy across the floor. We couldn't move, we couldn't even breathe when the sound stopped. We heard one last noise, the unmistakable creak of my bedroom door opening upstairs, and then something like a whisper floating. Down the stairs, my sister grabbed my hand and whispered my name, but I couldn't answer, because I realized the whisper wasn't coming from upstairs anymore. It was right behind us. We didn't dare turn around. We just sat there, frozen, breathing, shallow, like if we moved or made a sound, whatever was behind us would notice. I could feel the air shift. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath in the faint glow from the window. Something moved. It was small at first, a soft scrape against the floor behind the couch, then a slow dragging sound coming closer, inch by inch. My sister squeezed my hand so tightly that my fingers went numb. I tried to whisper her name, but no sound came out. I could hear something breathing. Behind us, it wasn't normal breathing. It was wet, shallow, like lungs full of water. I could smell that same damp earth again, stronger now, thick and heavy, filling my throat. It was like the smell of graves. The silence broke with a whisper so low, I almost thought it was in my head. It said my name, slowly stretching each syllable. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt something brush the back of my neck, cold and light, like a fingertip. I jerked forward and the couch creaked, Loudly, the sound echoed through the whole room and everything went still. I could feel it behind me, but I couldn't see it then. From upstairs came a crash. Something fell hard. Maybe furniture, maybe worse. It made the walls shake. I used that moment to grab my sister's arm and pull her toward the door. We ran barefoot through the dark, stumbling over everything. The floor felt soft under my feet like wet soil, as if the earth itself had crept inside. When we reached the door, I turned the knob, but it wouldn't move, locked from the inside. I pulled harder. Nothing happened behind us. The breathing started again. Louder. Closer. My sister started crying, whispering, "Please, please open it." I kicked the door with all the strength I had, and it flew open into the cold night air. We ran out without looking back, running down the dirt road toward my grandparents' house. Our feet hit the gravel, but it didn't hurt. We didn't stop, not until we saw the porch light. We banged on their door. Until my grandfather opened it, he looked at us, pale, shaking. Barefoot, covered in dirt, we tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. He went back with a flashlight to check the house. We waited on the porch, listening to the insects and the wind. Time passed slowly. Then we saw his light in the window of the living room, and then nothing. Minutes later, he came back. His face was blank. He didn't say anything for a long time, just told us both to sleep there for the night. When I asked what he saw, he said quietly that the front door had been wide open and there were footprints all over the floor. Small, muddy ones leading from the door up the stairs to my room and then back down again. But there was something else, he said. The footprints didn't stop at the door. They went straight through it, out into the dirt, as if whoever or whatever made them had walked through the wood itself later that night. As I lay awake in my grandparents' guest room, I heard faint tapping on the window. Slow, steady, like fingernails. I pulled the blanket over my head and prayed for it to stop. It didn't stop until sunrise. When the sun finally rose, the light felt wrong, like it didn't belong. The house was quiet, but the kind of quiet that hides something beneath it. My grandfather was already awake, sitting at the table, staring out the window. He hadn't slept. I could tell my sister was pale, her eyes empty. We didn't talk for a while, then my grandfather said he wanted to show me something. He took me outside to the edge of the yard where the dirt road began. The ground was damp from the morning dew, but there were prints in it, dozens of them. Small, bare footprints, all leading away from our house, but then turning back toward it, looping again and again like something had been walking in circles all night. I knelt to look closer and noticed something that made me sick to my stomach. There were tiny drag marks between each set of prints, like something was being pulled or crawling alongside them. My grandfather told me to go back inside and not to look anymore. He said he'd call someone to check the place later, but he never did that night. My parents came home early after hearing what happened. They didn't believe most of it. They said maybe we panicked. Maybe an animal got in and made the sounds, but I could see in my grandfather's eyes that he knew it wasn't just an animal. When we went back to the house, everything smelled faintly like wet dirt again. Even though we had been gone only one night, the living room looked normal. The stairs too. But when I went into my room, the air felt heavy, colder than the rest of the house. The window was slightly open, just enough for the curtains to move slowly in the breeze. I walked closer and saw faint streaks of mud on the wall below the window, like fingers dragging down my sister. Found her phone again, this time lying in the middle of the hallway as if someone had placed it there carefully. She picked it up and froze. The screen was cracked, but the line was open. Faint static came through and underneath it. A whisper. Soft, distant, repeating the same thing over and over. It sounded like my name. She threw the phone away and it hit the wall, shattering into pieces. That night I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. The air was thick again around 2 a.m. I heard the floorboards creak by my bed. Slow, careful creaks, like someone taking small steps. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, I just listened. Then the smell returned, stronger than ever. I could feel something standing near the edge of my bed, its weight pressed into the floorboards. I could hear it breathing, shallow and wet like before. But now there was a faint gurgle in it. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. And then it whispered again, this time right beside my ear, so close I could feel the cold air move against my skin. It said the same words I heard on the phone. You shouldn't have left me inside. I turned the lamp on instantly, but nothing was there. Just the faint outline of the wall and the smell fading slowly. I didn't sleep after that. When morning came, I told my sister what happened. She didn't say anything, she just stared at me. Then she lifted her sleeve. There were small, dark marks on her arm, thin lines like scratches. She said she woke up feeling something holding her wrist tight, something cold. She didn't know what to do, and neither did I. We thought about leaving the house, but my parents refused. They said it was just fear that we were imagining things. So we stayed. But every night after, that the sounds came back, sometimes the footsteps, sometimes the tapping, sometimes that whispering under the floorboards like someone talking through the wood. Sometimes when I closed my eyes, I could feel the bed shift slightly, like something small was crawling underneath the floor, following my breathing. Waiting for me to move, one night I woke up to the faint creak of my door opening by itself. The smell filled the room again, and in the pale moonlight, I saw a shape crouched at the corner, near the closet, small, hunched still, its head tilted too far to one side, its fingers dragging on the floor. It wasn't moving, just watching, breathing slow and broken. I blinked once and it was gone, but the sound of breathing stayed all night long. That night, after I saw the shape crouched near the closet, I couldn't move for what felt like hours. The air was heavy. It pressed against my chest. Each breath hurt. The shape didn't move at first. It just crouched there like it was waiting, and even when I blinked and it vanished, I could still feel its presence in the dark. The smell of wet soil never left. It hung in the air, thick and cold. The next morning, sunlight came through the curtains, but the light felt sickly pale. I could barely look at the floor where the shape had been. There was a faint print, something like a hand, but longer, stretched like fingers that weren't made for human bones. I didn't tell my parents. They had stopped listening weeks ago. Every time I tried, they looked at me with that half smile that said I was losing my mind. But my sister, she knew she wouldn't speak of it. But she knew her room was worse. She stopped sleeping there completely. She said the whispers had moved into her closet too. Sometimes she heard her own name. Sometimes she heard mine. She started locking her door from the outside when she left the house, as if she was trying to keep something in, not out. I started noticing scratches on the walls near the baseboards. They weren't from animals, they were symbols drawn into the paint. Thin, repeating shapes like a spiral with a line through it. I tried to scrub them off once, but under the fresh layer of paint, they bled through again, darker, thicker, like the wall itself. Was remembering I stopped trying after that. Nights turned into weeks and the house changed. The air hummed sometimes like faint electricity in the walls. My clock would stop at exactly 3:07 every night. And at that same time, I would hear a soft click from somewhere downstairs, like a lock turning. I would lie there frozen, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum. And then came the whisper again. Always behind me. Always close. Sometimes it said my name. Sometimes it just breathed. And sometimes it laughed low and quiet like a child trying not to be heard. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the flashlight and went downstairs. The air felt wrong. Colder. Heavier. The smell was stronger. The mud smell mixed with something, sweet and metallic. I reached the living room and saw the front door slightly open. I hadn't heard it open. I walked closer. The flashlight flickered. I saw footprints in the dirt leading inside, dozens of them. Small, bare footprints. The same ones from before, but now they were fresh. I followed them to the stairs. They led up to my room, every step darker than the last. Like the mud was thicker as it went higher. When I reached the landing, the door to my room was open. I could hear something moving inside. Slow dragging. I shined the light, but it flickered again and went out. The sound stopped. I stood there in the dark, waiting, and then I heard breathing from right behind me. I turned and saw nothing, but the smell hit me stronger than ever, like the ground had opened beneath me. I stumbled backward into my room, tripping over something soft. When I looked down, the flashlight blinked once and I saw what it was. My old blanket torn and soaked with mud, and under it faint letters written in dirt on the floor, "Stay inside." I didn't know what that meant. I ran out of the room, slammed the door behind me, and didn't stop until I reached the kitchen. I locked every door, every window. But it didn't matter. The air was still humming, faintly, like something was alive behind the walls. My sister came home early that morning. She saw me sitting by the door clutching the flashlight. She looked tired, pale. She said she had been having the same dream every night. A field of dirt? A door, buried underground, something knocking from inside it, calling our names. She said she could hear me screaming in her dream, and when she woke up, her hands were covered in dirt. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't leave the house for some reason. Every time we tried, something happened. The car wouldn't start, the road outside would flood, the phone lines would die. It was like the house itself was keeping us there. Days passed and we barely slept. The light bulbs kept burning out one by one, until only the faint glow from the hallway remained. Then one evening just before dark we heard it. The door creaking open on its own. The same sound as that first night. The same sound that had haunted every dream. We looked at each other, neither of us spoke. I stood up slowly. The air was freezing. The smell filled the room, and from the bottom of the stairs came that soft, dragging noise again. Slow. Heavy, deliberate. We didn't move. We just listened. It reached the top step, paused, and then the whisper came, this time clear, louder than before. It said, "You never left," and the lights went out. Everything turned black. The hum in the walls grew louder, like a deep pulse, and I could feel it under my feet. The floorboards vibrating like a heartbeat. Something was moving through the walls. I could hear it crawling. The sound of nails scraping wood coming closer from every direction. I grabbed my sister's hand and we ran into the living room, but it was darker than it should have been. Even the moonlight wouldn't come through the windows. I tripped and fell against the floor, and the boards felt soft again like wet ground. My sister screamed my name and then stopped, suddenly silent. I turned the flashlight on, but the beam was weak, barely. A flicker. She was gone. The room was empty. Just footprints, dozens of small, muddy ones circling me. The whisper came again. Softer. Closer, this time behind my ear. "You should have stayed in the dark." And then something cold wrapped around my ankle, pulling hard into the floor like the ground itself was alive. I screamed and kicked free. But when I looked down, the floor was solid, just wood and dust. I stumbled back, breathing hard. Shaking, the whisper was gone, but the smell lingered, heavier than ever. I stayed there until dawn, afraid to close my eyes. When morning came, everything looked normal again. The door closed, the floor dry, no footprints, but her room was empty. She never came back. I searched everywhere, called her phone. Nothing. My parents filed a report. The police searched the woods, the fields. They found nothing. No tracks, no signs, no trace of her at all. Only the same muddy prints in the hallway leading from her room to the front door, and stopping right there, as if she had walked straight into the wood and vanished. That was years ago. I still live here because every time I try to leave, something happens. The road disappears. The forest changes directions. The phone dies. The house hums at night. And I hear her voice, now faint, calling from the walls. Sometimes I think it's her. Sometimes I know it's not, because when I answer, it laughs in her voice. That night felt heavier than the others. The air around the house had changed. It was colder, but not in the kind of way that made you shiver. It was like the cold was inside the walls. Inside the breath you took every step. Echoed through the hallway. Even though there was carpet, like the house itself was hollow from the inside. My sister had been gone for 3 days. No one knew where she went. Her car was still in the driveway. Her phone still under the bed where we found it that night. My parents had gone to stay with my grandparents, but I told them I wanted to stay here. I said I wanted to help with the police, but the truth was something else. Something inside me wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted to know why the house still whispered at night, why the lights flickered in patterns, and why sometimes I woke up hearing my name from the other side of my bedroom wall. When the sun went down, the house seemed to sigh like it had been waiting for the dark. I sat in the living room with a flashlight and my phone, but I kept it on silent. I didn't want anyone to call. I didn't want any sound that wasn't mine. I remember staring at the front door. It was closed and locked, but the longer I looked at it, the more it seemed to breathe, like it was swelling and shrinking, just barely, but enough to make me stand up and step back. I went to the kitchen and the smell hit me immediately. It wasn't rot or smoke. It was something sweet, almost like burnt sugar mixed with iron. It made me dizzy. I turned the light on and the bulb flickered 3 times, then stayed dim and buzzing. The smell was strongest near the sink, and when I leaned over, I saw something dark around the drain. It looked like hair, long black strands coiled in the metal. But when I reached with a tissue and tried to pull it, the lights dimmed again and something moved down the pipe like it was retreating. I dropped the tissue and stepped back, and the buzzing sound from the bulb grew louder. The hair was gone. The smell faded, but I could hear something below me, faint tapping from the basement in a rhythm like someone whispering numbers over and over. I didn't want to go down there, but my feet started to move before I even decided. The steps creaked under my weight and the air grew thicker with each breath. At the bottom, the light switch didn't work, but there was a faint glow coming from the far corner where the old furnace was. I thought maybe a reflection or the pilot light, but as I got closer, I saw it wasn't from the furnace at all. It was something drawn on the wall. 3 symbols almost carved into the concrete and glowing faintly like wet paint. They weren't letters, they were shapes that twisted the longer you looked. One looked like a circle made of teeth, another like a set of crooked lines forming a doorway, and the last one was a spiral that seemed to pulse slowly. I reached toward it and felt warmth. Like the wall itself was alive and breathing. I pulled my hand back and the whispering from the drain started again, but louder this time and closer. I turned around fast and saw movement by the stairs. Something crawling slowly upward. The shape was small. Too small to be an adult. Too fast to be an animal. It moved on its hands and knees, but the arms bent backward at the elbows. I froze completely. It stopped halfway up and tilted its head at an angle that no neck should move. And for a moment I thought I saw her. My sister. Her hair the same. Her clothes the same, but her face was wrong. Her eyes too wide, her mouth moving like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then she smiled. That's when the light went out. I don't remember climbing the stairs. I don't remember how I ended up in my room. I only remember the sound of something scratching the wood outside my door. Slow, deliberate scratches like a pattern, a language I wasn't supposed to understand. I hid under the blanket like a child, holding my breath. The scratching stopped. Then a whisper came through the door. It was my name, but it wasn't her voice, it was mine. My own voice whispering from the other side of the door, asking if I was okay. Asking if I would let it in. I didn't sleep that night. And when the morning came, the house looked normal again. But when I went downstairs, the front door was open. The lock still in place, but the wood around it bent inward, like something had pushed through from the inside. And on the floor near the entrance, there were muddy footprints leading out, small ones like a child's, but they stopped halfway to the road and vanished into nothing. The days after that were wrong. They didn't pass. Like days, they felt stretched. Like melted hours leaking together. I stayed in the house because leaving made it worse. The air outside felt heavy, like it was pressing me back in. Every sound seemed distant. Even the wind sounded like it was behind a wall. I barely ate. I barely moved. I just listened because the house had started making new sounds. Slow groans deep inside the walls. Sometimes whispers. Sometimes thumps like small things running through veins that weren't meant for them. On the 4th day, the smell came back sweet and sharp and full of iron. This time it was coming from the wall beside the stairs, the one that always felt a little colder. I pressed my ear against it and heard something faint. Not voices, but movement, like breathing. Behind a thin curtain I didn't want to. But I pushed the old cabinet. Away from the wall, dust rose around me and I saw a thin crack running along the base. It looked like it had been filled before patched with paint. But now the plaster had flaked, revealing dark wood underneath. I got a knife from the kitchen and began scraping. My hand was shaking, but something in me wanted to know. Wanted to see if the sound was real. The knife slipped deeper than I expected, and a small piece of the wall broke off. A breath of cold air came through from behind it. There was space back there, not a crawl space, not just emptiness, it was deeper. I pulled more of the plaster away until there was a hole wide enough to fit my arm. When I reached inside, the air was damp, like it had never touched light. My fingers brushed against something smooth, wet like clay. But then I felt something else, hair long, tangled and cold. I pulled back and stumbled away. The smell grew stronger, filling the room. The house seemed to hum around me like the sound of insects crawling through pipes. Ran to the basement because I thought maybe it was connected. The same faint glow was still there, but dimmer this time. The symbols on the wall looked older, dry, like blood, and the spiral had cracked in the middle. The furnace was off. Yet there was warmth coming from behind it when I pushed it slightly. I heard a hollow sound. The wall behind was different. It didn't sound like concrete. It sounded like wood. I found a hammer and hit the panel. It broke easier than it should have, revealing a narrow tunnel slanting downward into dark, wet soil. The smell was unbearable, but I stepped inside. The floor felt alive, soft under my shoes. I held my phone for light. The tunnel went deeper, maybe 10 meters before opening into a small chamber. The walls were made of packed earth, but something had been carved into them. Shapes, symbols, faces, all distorted. Some looked human, others not in the center of the room. There was a wooden box, half buried. I wiped dirt from the lid. It wasn't a coffin. It was smaller. Maybe the size of a child. Inside was a pile of fabric and hair tied together with string and bits of bone. I almost ran, but something in the corner caught my light. There was a photograph stuck into the dirt, covered with mold. I pulled it out, and my breath stopped. It was my sister standing by the same wall upstairs, smiling, the same clothes, the same night she disappeared behind her in the photo. The cabinet was already moved, the wall already open. I dropped the picture and heard movement behind me, not fast, just one slow step, something breathing too close. I turned and the light hit something pale. A face pressed against the dirt wall, but it wasn't attached to anything. It just sank slowly back into the soil, leaving an outline of where it had been. I crawled back toward the tunnel, but the sound followed me. Whispers from all directions, they sounded like my own voice again. Overlapping, repeating words I couldn't make out. When I reached the stairs, the lights in, the basement were flickering on and off in rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. Every time the light flashed, the symbols glowed brighter as if feeding from the darkness. The hum of the house grew deeper, shaking dust from the ceiling. I ran to the living room, but the cabinet had moved back by itself. The hole I opened was gone, painted over as if it had never existed. The smell vanished. The hum faded and everything fell silent. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, afraid to blink, afraid the room would change again. When the morning light finally came through the curtains, it looked wrong. It was red. Not the color of dawn, more like rust. And for a second I thought I saw handprints on the glass, small ones pressed from the inside, fading slowly until there was nothing left. For days I didn't hear anything. Not the whispers, not the footsteps, only silence that felt heavier than sound. I tried to tell myself it was over, that whatever was down there had gone. But the house never really slept. It watched. The walls pulsed. Faintly in the dark, I could see it sometimes in the corners of my eyes. The shadows didn't move with the light. They moved with me. They waited. When I turned away, I would feel the air behind me shift, as if something leaned close enough to breathe. My breath. One night I woke up because someone was humming. The tune was quiet, broken like a song remembered wrong. It came from my closet, soft and slow. I sat up and listened. It was my voice humming, but I wasn't moving. I whispered hello, and the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the humming. Then I heard it whisper my name from inside the closet. It sounded like me, like a recording played through water. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't move. The handle turned once, twice, then stopped. I waited maybe a minute, maybe an hour. I couldn't tell time in that room anymore. In the morning, the closet door was open, only a crack. My clothes were on the floor, like something had been searching through them. I found small, muddy handprints on the wall near the baseboard, too small for mine, but spaced like someone had been crawling. I cleaned them, but the marks stayed faint. Shadows of fingers burned into the paint. I tried to leave the house. I even stepped outside, but the air outside felt wrong too, bright too. Still like a photograph, I couldn't breathe out there, so I went back in and locked the door behind me. That night, the lights flickered again in the same rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. I counted without thinking, and the rhythm matched my heartbeat. I turned off every light, but the flicker didn't stop. It came from somewhere deeper behind the walls. I could see faint flashes through the cracks. The humming came back louder this time all around me, not just from the closet, I covered my ears, but I could feel it vibrating inside my chest like the sound wasn't in the air, but in me. I went to the basement again. I don't even know why. Maybe to prove I wasn't afraid. Maybe because it was calling me. The symbols were bright again, red this time, like veins glowing through flesh, and the spiral moved, not spinning but breathing. It was wider than before. I could see into it, like a tunnel that went nowhere. The whispers rose, with each breath, until I realized they were saying something I could understand. It was my name again. Repeated, then another phrase over and over. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out. I stepped closer, and the spiral rippled like water. I saw something, behind it a reflection, but wrong. The same face, same eyes, but smiling too wide, too long. My reflection tilted its head and mouthed words I couldn't hear. Then I heard them, not with my ears, but in my head. It said, "You left me here. You shut the wall. You locked the door. Now let me out." I stumbled back, the floor under me soft like the ground in the tunnel. My reflection kept smiling, its mouth stretching wider until it wasn't a face anymore, just a dark hole, and from it came a sound that was almost laughter, almost screaming. I ran up the stairs, but the house stretched longer, each step echoing too far. I reached the living room, but everything looked different. The furniture was wrong, older, the wallpaper peeling in colors I didn't remember. I looked toward the window and saw movement outside, a figure standing in the yard looking up at me. I thought it was a person, until it raised its hand in the same slow motion I had made a moment before. It was me, standing outside watching myself. From the dark I turned away, and every mirror, every window showed the same thing. My reflection smiling from places I wasn't. I screamed. I don't know if anyone heard. I don't know if I even made a sound. The lights went out, and in the black, I heard the voice right beside my ear, soft, calm, mine and not mine at once, saying, "It's better now, we can share. We don't have to be two anymore." I felt a hand touch my shoulder, cold and light. Then my own voice whispered again, this time from inside my head, not outside, "Welcome home." The morning after that night didn't look like morning at all. The sky outside was a dull gray color that never changed. I watched it for hours, and it stayed exactly the same. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of the road. It felt like the world had stopped moving, and the house was the only thing still alive inside it. I tried to check the clock, but it blinked 12 over and over, as if it refused to count time. The room smelled like rain, though. It hadn't rained in days. The air was heavy with dust that seemed to hang in slow motion. Every breath felt thick, like breathing through water. I wandered from room to room, and everything looked older, like I had stepped into someone else's memory. The wallpaper was torn in places, showing patterns I'd never seen beneath it. Faded drawings of trees and circles, and strange faces drawn with something dark, maybe charcoal, maybe not. In my sister's room, the light from the window was dim, but I could see the dust moving like smoke. There was something on her bed, a book I didn't remember. It was small leather, cracked at the edges when I opened it. The pages were blank at first, then faint. Writing started to appear like ink bleeding through. From the other side, the words were shaky, uneven. Written in a hurry, it said, "The house does not keep secrets, it keeps people." Then the ink faded back into the paper until nothing was left. That night I couldn't sleep because the sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere below. But when I went to the basement, it was dry. The symbols were still there, faint like scars. But a new one had appeared, a circle around the spiral, like an eye closing over it, and under it, the same phrase I saw in the book carved into the wall, shallow but clear. "The house does not keep secrets, it keeps people." I went back upstairs and found more writing carved under the windowsill in the living room, a date I didn't recognize. 1953. The wood around it was smooth, like someone had traced the letters 1,000 times beside it. Another line in faint pencil said, "She still walks between the rooms." The words looked older than the house itself. I began to dream while awake. I would blink and see the hallways in a different light, filled with furniture. I didn't own photos of people I didn't know laughing at tables that weren't there, and every time I blinked they vanished, but the smell of them stayed. Perfume, old paper, something sweet and rotten. Once I saw a child sitting on the stairs playing with a toy car. He looked at me and smiled. His mouth didn't move. but I heard his voice somewhere behind me saying, "Do you live here too?" Days passed, or maybe it was one long day. I stopped trying to tell the difference every time I woke. The house looked slightly changed, one more picture on the wall, one more door that shouldn't exist. Once I opened a door that should have led to the bathroom and found a narrow hallway, instead lined with mirrors all covered in dust except one that was clean. The mirror showed the room I was standing in, but without me in it. Just empty space. The walls behind me, breathing slowly, in and out. I closed the door, and when I opened it, again the bathroom was back, but the mirror over the sink had cracked right down the middle. I saw my reflection split in two. One side, smiling, the other, crying. And for a moment I thought I could hear them arguing quietly. But when I leaned closer, the sound became the soft hum of the house again, steady, patient, endless. I think the house remembers everything that has ever happened inside it, and sometimes it lets pieces of those memories drift up like bubbles in deep water. Maybe that's what I'm seeing. Maybe that's what my sister saw before she vanished. Maybe she didn't leave at all. Maybe the house just remembered her too well. The house stopped following the rules of time. It didn't get dark. It didn't get light. It just breathed in a gray, endless hum. Sometimes when I looked at the clock, it would show a date instead of numbers. And every time I blinked, it changed sometimes. To years long before I was born, sometimes to years I had never lived yet. I tried to write them down, but the paper always came out blank in the morning, one day, or maybe night. I opened the door to the hallway and saw sunlight pouring through windows. That shouldn't exist. The wallpaper was bright yellow and there was music somewhere soft. Old like a record spinning in another room, the air smelled like soap and coffee. I heard footsteps above me and voices laughing. I called out hello, but no. One answered when I walked into the kitchen. Everything was wrong, it wasn't mine. The counters were lined with glass jars. The table had a lace cloth, and a newspaper from 1962 lay folded neatly in the center. I turned around, and for a second, I saw a woman standing by the sink, her back to me, humming the same tune I'd heard in my dreams. She was wearing a dress that shimmered slightly when she moved. I said something. I don't remember what she turned slowly, her face kind, her smile small, but her eyes empty, like she didn't see me at all. Then the whole room shifted like a ripple on water. She was gone and the kitchen looked like mine again. Old, broken, dusty. The newspaper still there, but yellowed into dust after that. Every door I opened led to a different version of the house. Sometimes the furniture was new, sometimes rotted, sometimes covered in white sheets as if waiting for people to return. Once I opened the front door and saw the same road, but no trees, no sky, just black air and faint stars hanging too close like holes burned into paper. When I shut the door, my reflection was standing behind it. Facing me, the house whispered more clearly. Now words without sound, thoughts that weren't mine. They came like memories, but not my own flashes of faces I didn't know, children playing in the yard that no longer existed. A man building the stairs brick by brick, humming that same tune, always that tune. Sometimes I would wake up in another room without remembering, walking there, and the air would be thick with dust glowing in light that came from nowhere. I found a photo once under the rug near the stairs. It showed the house half finished, and in the window, a figure standing, just a shadow shape, but familiar. When I looked closer, the outline matched me exactly, even the tilt of the head, even the hand on the frame. I don't know if I was seeing forward or backward anymore. Maybe both. Maybe the house was showing me that I had always been here. The longer I stayed, the less the world outside mattered. I tried to leave again, but the door just opened into another version of the same hallway, looping endlessly, each turn taking me somewhere that felt close but wrong, the walls whispering slower now, like the heartbeat of something enormous sleeping beneath the floorboards. I think I began to understand what the words meant. The house does not keep secrets, it keeps people. Sometimes I see my sister at the end of the hall, not like before, not wrong or broken, just standing there watching. She doesn't move. She doesn't speak. But every time I blink, she's closer. Her eyes calm, like she knows something I don't like. She's waiting for me to remember what I was supposed to do here. What I Was supposed to be the house was no longer pretending, it no longer shifted slowly or whispered softly. It spoke through every wall, through every breath it took from me. I could hear the rhythm of its pulse under the floor, a deep, slow thud like something old and alive beneath the foundations. The air was wet, heavy, with a smell of soil and metal. Every light in the house flickered at once and stayed dim, glowing like dying embers. I knew it was calling me, not with words, but with memory, pulling me toward the basement one last time. I walked through the hallway and the walls seemed to lean closer as if watching me. The pictures that had hung crooked before were straight now, each one showing the same image, my sister and I standing by the door, smiling, frozen in a moment that had never happened, her hand on my shoulder, my hand on hers. But in every frame, the shadows behind us were darker, thicker, like someone else stood there waiting. I didn't look away. I just kept walking. The air grew warmer with every step. The basement door opened before I touched it. The smell rushed out stronger than ever, sweet and sharp and full of decay. I went down slowly, the light behind me fading until the only glow came from the wall, the spiral, the eye, the circle all blazing red as if the house had veins and blood of its own. The sound came from everywhere now, deep below the floor, like 1,000 voices breathing together, saying the same word, home. I stepped closer to the wall, and the symbols moved not like paint but like skin shifting under the surface. I reached out my hand and felt heat pulsing against my palm. The surface gave way, soft and warm. I pushed through and the wall opened like a door, revealing a space that wasn't a room. It was a throat. The walls of it slick and alive, the same symbols carved deeper, glowing brighter. I could feel the heartbeat all around me. And for the first time I wasn't afraid because I understood. The house had never been haunted. It had never been cursed. It was alive in everything it kept. Everything it whispered, every name, every memory, every shadow was part of its body. I saw my sister there in the red light, her eyes calm, her skin glowing faintly. She smiled the same soft smile and said, "It's all right, we belong here, we always did." She held out her hand, and when I took it, the floor rippled beneath us like water. I could hear my own heartbeat matching the rhythm of the house. I could feel the walls breathing with me, the same air, the same pulse. The light grew brighter until there was nothing but red warmth and silence. I thought I heard my name one last time. Not from her, not from me, but from the house itself whispering, "Thank you." Then everything stopped. No sound, no breath, no thought, just stillness. They found the house weeks later empty. No sign of struggle, no bodies, no damage. The doors locked from the inside. Only the faint scent of burnt sugar in the air, and on the wall of the basement, 3 symbols freshly carved, glowing faintly like embers, cooling. The last one, a perfect spiral, closed at the center.